Hey, welcome back to the program. The Justice Department this week issued a scathing report against Ferguson, Missouri, where the young man was killed. You recall Michael Brown here a couple of months ago. And the conclusions, I'm reading this out of the Wall Street Journal, from the Justice Department's report this week says that police in Ferguson routinely violated the civil rights of the city's black residents. Officers stopped blacks and arrested them at a far higher rate than people of other races, is what they found. And so they're asking for they're going to continue an investigation and asking that Ferguson take some immediate action. I know this area well. I went to high school in St. Louis, Missouri, a place called Ladue. St. Louis is an interesting city. St. Louis itself is not that big of a city. It's a smaller city, but it's surrounded by hundreds of municipalities, like Ferguson, Ladue, where I live. There's just a number of smaller municipalities completely surrounding the St. Louis area. And I went through Ferguson a great deal, dated a girl over in Ferguson, Missouri. I used to travel over there on weekends. And I know the area well, and it has become the focus and rock bed of concern within the African-American community about overwhelmingly black profiling in terms of the violence that takes place, the tickets that are issued. We've read so much about it. And here's the point I'd like to make to you today, that although those facts are probably true, I mean, I don't dispute the facts. I don't know otherwise. I'll tell you some other things about Ferguson. It's 70% black city, has a police department that is 94% white. That doesn't reflect the population. Of the 6 city council members, 5 are white. The mayor is a white Republican. The school board has 7 members with 1 black in a school district that is 75% black. So you ask the question, how does a city with an overwhelmingly black majority allow themselves to be governed by a white minority that does not reflect the population? And that's the big effort. Well, I looked into the situation because that surprised me too. And what I found out was the simple premise that elections have consequences. You are who you vote for in terms of how you're governed. Let me tell you some things about Ferguson, Missouri. In the last election that took place that elected all these municipal officials, overwhelmingly white, the turnout in the black community was 3 times lower than that of white voters. In this past municipal election, just 6% of African-American voters showed up to the polls. That means that 94% of local African-Americans opted not to participate and elect those who make the laws that govern Ferguson. They just didn't show up at the polls. So as I say, elections have consequences, and you can even go further. If you don't like what happens in the election, in Missouri, they have a provision where you can recall all the officials. By a majority vote, you can recall the mayor, all the city council, the school board, by majority vote. So the city has almost 70% African Americans, and yet they are complaining about what happened. And if there are abuses, they should complain. But here's my point. If you don't participate in the system, then you almost give up your right to protest. You see what I'm saying? We have a process, a democratic system in this country that says that you get to have the right to choose who represents you. You have a right to pick and choose, and if you don't like them, particularly in Ferguson, Missouri, there's an easy recourse. 50% can say, hey, we're not waiting to the next election. We're going to bring it to a head right now. You are out because 50% plus 1 voted to kick you out. And you've got a 70% African-American majority in that city. So I guess if I were second guessing the leadership in Ferguson, there has to be some African-American leaders up that way who would say, look, we got to get together. We got to get our people registered. We've got to make a difference. I mean, Republicans do that all over the country, and Democrats do that all over the country. Candidates for president do that. Candidates for governor do that, right down to the local level. And so if you want to bring about some change, there is a way you can bring about this. Well, there's 2 ways. There's 2 ways you can bring about some change in Ferguson and any other community where there is a proportionate, unfair singling out of certain racial groups or things you just don't like. 2 ways to do it. Number one, you can riot in the streets like we saw at Ferguson a good bit. You can go in and burn down buildings and riot and shoot guns and carry on a lot of violence. Or your other alternative is you can follow the procedure of elections and vote your feelings at the polls, organize, get your vote out to the polls, and make significant change. So I am sympathetic to the report that certain groups should not be profiled. I don't care what group you are. But if you don't take any action to change, if you just sit there, don't participate, don't register, don't vote, then really, don't you have just your own self to blame? Isn't that the case? I'll be right back.